Once again, I'm delighted that we've got Irenosen Okojie, the award-winning author, with us today. Irenosen is a Nigerian-British author whose work pushes the boundaries of form, language, and ideas. And her debut novel, Butterfly Fish, received a Betty Trask Award. Her first short story collection, Speak Gigantula, was shortlisted for the Jalak Prize and the Edge Hill Short Story Prize. And her second, Nudibranch, was longlisted for the Jalak Prize. And the story Grace Jones won the AKO Kane Prize for African Writing. She's a contributing editor for The White Review and co-presents the BBC's Turn Up for the Books podcast. She's judged prizes, including the Women's Prize for Fiction, the Dylan Thomas Prize, the Gordon Byrne Prize, and the BBC National Short Story Award. She's vice chair of the Royal Society of Literature and was awarded an MBE for services to literature in 2021. And she's the founder of Black to the Future, a multidisciplinary Afrofuturist festival. And in conversation with Irenosen is our very own Dr Alysa Ghose, an anthropologist who examines the interplay of race, gender, kinship, and sexuality. And her research focuses span Afro-diasporic religious traditions, migration, and reproductive justice. Here at the School of Divinity, Alysa is a lecturer in Religion and Decolonisation, and she is the director of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion group. So please join me in giving both of them a really warm welcome, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lois. I think we should start with a reading.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I didn't recognize myself there. Who's she talking about? Thank you. I'm going to kick off reading from the opening extract. In this extract, we find Zormira, one of our main protagonists, abandoning her group of shaman women for a greater cause. So this is the opening bits. Gethsemane, Cape Verde, West Africa, 17th century. All pregnant, 5 of us glimmer on the snaky path towards the low cacophony of the humming creek. Dusky goddesses breach through buried carcasses. We hear gifts turning in the ground's crevices. Barefoot, we sing to Oni, clutching one bone each. Lengthy red beads knock against our chests. The insides of rounded stomachs jostle with the rhythm of parched entities. White markings on our foreheads fade to confuse the forest traffic. Inky trickles sliver from our braided crowns down craned necks. Our nipples are pert against the morning. Behind us, the mountains of Gethsemane loom. A slow mist unfurls to reveal crooked homesteads in its folds, waiting to be shed in a purging between orbs of fire and a fog that will blind the fishermen, that will catch them in their own nets while the sea's creatures buck against the holes in the boats, sharing one eye, as their wives lose their bottom halves in fevered dreams. We sing. The mountains, bruised and magisterial in their morning stupor, absorb our voices, sprawling peaks and troughs dimpled with dew. White cloths wrapped around our waists feel loose on sweat-glazed skin, rustling against our thighs. The hems trailing behind us are pale, movable dawns. We ask our reflections to wait patiently for us in the water, tell floating lilies to be soft landing pads for a small reckoning. We ask the light bending to allow our internal bleeding to leak through our nipples into its axis points. We call Oni to build a golden arch marked with her fingerprints, so traces of peyotes beneath our tongues will know their inheritance. We dance, we chant. Hollering abandons our mouth chase a fleet-footed spirit, marking areas for reinventions between trembling trees. At the bank, we scoop translucent sap from conspiratorial trees. The sky is starting to blush blue. The creek's seductive language threatens to break liquid confines. We call Oni by her name, walk into the water, form a ring. The water rises, its cold temperature cocooning weeds grazing our feet in the murky depths below. We raise our heads to the heavens as the sky rattles, just as one of us confesses to carrying a fetus that fell from a mountain. One by one we speak. One of us proclaims she has been plagued by locusts wielding a strain of fever, scuttling through her bloodstream, hundreds of them gathering in her stomach, digging thin, sharp legs into the lining. their flutterings ringing so loudly she can hear it while she breathes as they scale her insides, desperate for an exit. Another has had a stained black burial lace dress curling and twitching on a bough, trying to claim her organs to build its own body, causing her to wake some morning seeing her gauzy organs inching their way towards the dawn, a retracting lung following a misshapen heart, trailing a shrunken kidney. While the dress creases in anticipation, her stomach full of a winding lace horizon. Another is pregnant with a mermaid's bright orange tail, flapping, bending, pulsing in her womb, scattering shimmering scales until her tongue is stained silver. I do not confess. The amalgamation of 100 hatchings ring in my bloodstream as it heats. Spots of gold appear in my peripheral vision. An echo with the stealth of smoke passes through my eardrums. The gaps between the trees have cloud instruments fragmenting. The volume of our voices increases. Our reflections lose their fingers in branches. Clusters of purple geraniums sprout on their backs from a future spring. We hold our bones up to the sky. Grooves appear on the bank, a gutting of earth as the forest creatures quiver while the golden arch appears. Oni has kept her promise. We emerge from the water, dripping rivulets onto the bank. My nipples leak blood. There is a deafening sound in my ears, a roar of such magnitude. I wonder if the others are experiencing it too. We circle the arch, lie in birthing positions, raising our knees up. We give birth. The others place their birth offerings to Oni in the arch. I do not. Confused, the women turn away from me, watch the offerings rupture. I hold Oni's gift to me tenderly. It is another face like mine, baby. I turn my back drunk with this knowledge, as though I found a silver coin in a dragon fruit. I do not ask Oni how a woman can give birth to herself. The face begins to flicker. Baby's limbs seem fragile in my grasp. Her small, perfect fist grips mine in an unspoken promise. Letting go, I pick up my bone, white and hollowed. I break from the pack. The sound of a newborn thunders in my ears. I leave my baby behind. Her piercing scream rings through the air like 1,000 clarion calls, losing their heads in a treacherous womb. My puckered bloody nipple turns towards her waiting new mouth, slick and shrill in its sweetness, its divinity, born in love, stamped as weapon by a mother's disappearing shadow. Already commanding the heavens to change fates, we are bound by this second joining, then separated. Bone, dense and changeable in my hand, acting as a compass. Pain emanates from my core. There will be punishments to come. I stifle the screaming inside me that is my child's voice infiltrating my tongue. Running, I press the bone against the shard of light. Thank you. Thank you.
Better turn my mic back on. Thank you so much. Irenosen, that's a fabulous introduction to obviously the book, that's why it's there, but also our conversation. I wondered if you might talk to us a bit about religion, spirituality, whatever you might call the practice and the rituals that unfold in the novel as that which blurs lines and boundaries. Obviously, there are spatial and temporal boundaries that are blurred. There are also boundaries between self and other, and even kind of multiple selves at play. Could you talk about that a bit more, and then we can kind of take our conversation from there?
Yeah, that's so much to talk about.
I mean, just like really casual, you know.
But yeah, I guess religion, shamanism really interested me when I was thinking about framing the novel and the idea around feminine power and bodies, altered states, being able to travel through different time periods and what that would look like. The idea of shamanism really appealed to me, which is, you know, the practice of healing, but also lifting community up you know, being able to travel, being able to lift other women up and other voices up. But I was thinking about the darkness of it too, because, you know, as women, we're often held to different standards, but I really like to write complex women and women with an edge. So the idea that this spiritual practice could also be, you know, a kind of power to do good, but also to harm, you know, to wreak havoc, to enact revenge, really interested me. But also that I could take onus of it and kind of expand the idea of what shamanism could be. We talked about this earlier, the fact that it's often framed as a male, a masculine space, which I thought was really interesting because that never came into my mind when I was writing this. So that was really the origin of it. Also, I have to say that when I visited Cape Verde years back, and I visited a shaman, that really stayed with me, that experience of, you know, what she was like and her sort of practice and how she looked and the kind of connection to the earth and the land, and respecting all of that really struck me. So those were kind of the origins of incorporating that in the book, but also I was thinking about the speculative space and what kind of, I guess, practice, rituals, religion, if you call it, would lend itself to that space really well. And I didn't want to do something witchy, if that makes sense, because I feel like that's been done so much. So I wanted a kind of different, fresh spin. And I was really intrigued by shamanism. So that was kind of, yeah, the impetus to frame the book. But I'm also intrigued by the female body and the Black female body as well. And I guess trauma and how, you know, that can be carried through time. How that can be inherited, but particularly with Blackness, but to kind of flip that and make it a power, you know, make it something that's transformational and intriguing and elusive and mysterious, but also just really alive. And yeah, it just felt like this amalgamation of ideas. I was so excited when it came to me, but also to just keep thinking about ways to expand it and make it bigger, and have it in 2 different time zones, and also the idea of multiple selves. We touched on this earlier too, but you know, we all have different masks that we wear, right? And they're all us. It doesn't mean that we're being fake. They're all us. We have different iterations of ourselves depending on the space that we're in and the time. And that really struck me about Zulmira in particular, my main sort of shaman protagonist, that she had these other lives, and that one of these other lives was actually quite devastating and painful. And when we find her in the world that she's in, she's kind of infiltrating the lives of this fisherman and his family, but also strange occurrences are happening in the town. So is she a force for good or isn't she? You know, so I love the ambiguity of that and playing with, I guess, the reader's expectations around how women are supposed to be and how they're supposed to live. And if they are practicing religious practices, you know, how strictly do they stick to the rules and what are the rules? And can you make up the rules as you go along if you have like a blueprint? So yeah, I guess all of that was fodder for, you know, the themes that you've mentioned.
Yeah, that is fabulous. I think the ambiguity and the ambivalence and the kind of not duplicity, but polyvalence of experience and of self comes through. And especially kind of the evocative writing is beautiful. Like,
thank you.
Super. We'll talk about it more in a moment, but I think you really showcase the kind of nature-based religiosity or spirituality as well. I find it really interesting what you're saying about kind of the witchiness and wanting to maybe, you know, avoid that trope. And yes, we chatted just before the event about kind of in literature and old school kind of anthropology of religion, the trope of shamanism being a masculinist practice of shapeshifting and predicated on ownership of self and body and command of that it was considered masculinist, and spirit possession as a foil in a way for that, as the instability of bodily form and self as inherently feminine, and the vulnerability. And so I love what you're saying about kind of what your goal in terms of gender and kind of reclamation of the female body, the Black female body in particular, in dialogue with those tropes, I think is achieved really well.
Thank you so much. And also something that always strikes me is when I'm reading literature, when we see Black women protagonists, it's never like fully dimensional, which is the frustration of mine. So you know, you'll see depictions, but you won't see their full lives or their full selves, and you won't see aspects of sexuality or sensuality. And that's something that I'm really keen on with my characters in all my books, is showing that side of them, showing the kind of the hidden lives of Black female characters, if you like. And I think that the sensuality of the writing and kind of exploring the female body in this is quite visceral, but also hopefully really potent. So, you know, we have, not to spoil it for everybody, but we have like fruit, you know, breaching through a rib cage, you know, so we have things that you wouldn't normally put together happening, and they can be quite uncomfortable bodily occurrences. But I was really intrigued by that. I was really intrigued by, yeah, how the female body can mutate and transform, and what that means actually in a space where they are the ones with the power. So in both timelines, we have Zulmira, and then we have Therese in the modern timeline. And Therese, under the instructions of Oni, who is the female shaman god, ruling everything and all seeing and all watching, all knowing, they are building a separate utopia, you know, where the world as we know it is completely different and the rules are completely different. But it's beautiful. Hopefully. And it's kind of a space to reconfigure what we expect of our daily lives and the vision of what the world can be. So yeah, all of that is, I think, it's quite subversely political as well, because you have two Black women kind of taking the world to a different space. So yeah, I think the novel is subversive in lots of different ways, I hope. I think I'm inherently interested in the female lens and looking at the world, because as a Black woman moving through different spaces, yeah, that seeing myself reflected has not always been the case. So I kind of want to realign that with my fiction, and kind of really bring them into the center. Looking at historical aspects, modern aspects, and you know how we can make those worlds much more expansive, but also really, really rich. I mean, I did a similar thing with Butterfly Fish, which looked at the Benin Kingdom. It's just that Curandera is much weirder and wilder than that book. That book is quite tame in comparison to Curandera. But I mean, also doing interesting things with time and you know. The female experience and what that looks like, and also reclaiming history. My family are from Benin, so and I remember my father talking to me about, you know, the brass heads and the brass artifacts and the history of Benin as a child, and that I was just so fascinated that I felt it kind of gave me a sort of power to reclaim it and reimagine it. So I'm really interested in African histories, because we don't really get taught African histories, I think, except slavery, which is like, yeah, slavery happened, but there's so much more that happened that's, I think, quite empowering. So I always like to sort of, when I'm working in the novel form, see if I can, you know, do things around the historical, but also hopefully put a modern twist on it as well, you know, where like history meets the future and you can't kind of separate the two. And I feel like I'm doing that with Curandera. So.
Absolutely. And I think especially when you talk about those bits that, you know, if you do see Black female protagonists, they're quite one-dimensional often, not always, but often, and how you were really wanting to add the full depth, right, which includes joy and loss and all the textures. I think that's something that maybe, could you speak a bit about sort of sexuality and sensuality in terms of the spiritual practice in the novel? I think that's something that the reader gets really, really poignantly comes across. Maybe that's something you could talk about, but also perhaps in dialogue with the concept of kin. Kin is obviously something that perhaps all of us in this room have an understanding of in the everyday, but it means something very particular for this work. I wonder if you might outline that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, well, kin are the shamanic disciples. They are her female, the female brethren, if you will, to Zulmira, who she abandons in the beginning and kind of sets off to enact this act of revenge that becomes all-encompassing. But kin are always around. They're always sort of watching her life and what's happening. And then we have kin in the modern timeline as well. So we have the modern band of shamans who are sort of, you know, soldiers of Oni again. So they're all kind of connected, except you have, you know, one group historically and one group in the modern space, all with the task of, you know, building the world, reconfiguring the world as we know it in a different way. So they have that in common. But what was really interesting to me was to kind of figure out the sort of aesthetics of kin, where they're kind of lingering on the periphery, especially in Zulmira's timeline, where we don't see them often, but, you know, we feel them, you know, internally, even in her sort of internal dialogue, where we're kind of sitting in her internal landscapes and her mental space. She talks about kin, you know, she talks about what they look like, how they feel, the kind of interconnections between her body and theirs, the intertwining and the amalgamation of all of that. So I thought that was a really interesting way of making them present and sort of sinister as well. I think there's a kind of sinister aspect to kin too, because like I said, I never like to write, you know, nice women. I don't do nice women. So kin have this sort of edge to them, I think, both in the past timeline and in the present. And in the present, we have the group, you know, with Therese, and they're a close-knit group. They're doing this secret task for Oni. They're building this utopia, but it costs them in terms of the physical price, the physical cost of constantly traveling to a different space and a different utopia, and how that, you know, everything is heightened for them, you know, the sound of things, the taste of things, a certain hunger that they keep needing to fill and fulfill, but it becomes all-encompassing, and the kind of dangers of that. But some of that is hopefully written in a sensual way when you're talking about the sensuality, particularly when I'm describing Therese in the modern timeline and some of her experiences around her body, and just also sort of stepping into her own power, because she is the most powerful within the group. And I think that causes tensions. But the sense of her really stepping into herself in that timeline and what that feels like, and you know, her sensuality and her attraction to one of her fellow kin who goes missing mysteriously, and her sort of quest to find him, and then also kind of exploring their relationship, their attraction. Some of that is quite sensual, I think, and hopefully adds to, you know, the complexities around her and what she needs, what she's seeking, what's her quest, what's her goal, but also just her as a woman. So yeah, for me, it's really important to do that, to kind of really explore Black female characters, like I said, in a complicated, multi-dimensional way, because, you know, you don't see that very often. So you kind of, for me, it's important to use my agency and use the space to be able to do that.
It strikes me as really, really interesting the way you talk about kind of the components of kin that can be sinister, and, you know, thinking about kin as that which enables you to do things, but not always in this kind of rosy, straightforward, romantic way, which also makes me want to circle back to kind of the concept of gifts in the novel. And we were talking earlier about one of the kind of classical anthropological definitions of danger or dirt is when matter is out of place. You know, the easy kind of example of it is always like, which I, you know, put to you earlier, is like a hair on your head isn't necessarily disgusting or frightening, But if it was in your soup, you know, that gives you like, well, that's gross. Like that's not meant to be there. So matter out of place. And it made me think of some of the gifts that occur or appear, quite literally appear in the novel. I was thinking of pips flooding from bloodied mouths, disembodied rib cages that bear fruit or bloom flowers. And I was wondering if you could sort of think through that. I think that's an example of, on one hand, the beautiful immersive prose that really in so many ways reads much more like poetry, but also details how like sensorially evocative the writing is. It makes, you know, your hair raise and stand on your skin, and it kind of at times can be really, you know, tender, and at times can kind of churn your stomach. So if you could
Make you feel sick.
like but in a super effective kind of impactful way, which I think is what you want out of a good read, you know? So I wondered if you could speak a bit to sort of, in a way, that literary grotesqueness of the gift.
Yeah, I mean, I like body horror.
Sure.
I should say that. So
Yeah,
some of my short stories have, you know, quite a bit of body horror. So for example, there's a short story called Kookaburra Sweet, where a woman becomes what she eats and then separates into like, different, essentially fragments, and it's disgusting, but hopefully like quite compelling as well. So I'm really intrigued by that. How I can stretch using the female body to kind of construct these striking imagery that also speaks to, you know, the story and connecting things. And by that, I mean, so for example, the rib cage in this connects timelines. I won't spoil it for people who will pick up the book, but it connects the past and the present. And, you know, the fruit, the bloodied fruits, it is a way of them imbibing some of those past memories from the Gethsemane 17th century timeline. So they're literally eating fruit, but also swallowing memories that start to bloom within them in really messed up ways. I really love doing that. I really love matter out of place. Not that I was intentionally thinking matter out of place when I was writing it. No, that's really nice of you to say that. Gosh, I wish I was that intuitive. But I just like grotesque stuff. And maybe like having fun with that, you know. So yeah, it was really cool to think about motifs, you know. So for example, there's the motifs of the feathers in the novel too, which also connects things. So I was kind of playing around and thinking, well, how can I make this really evocative for the reader? Also in a way that speaks to the darkness of shamanism, you know, the sort of the ritualistic practices and elements. And it felt like, things like using the images of the gifts and sort of putting a different spin on it, making it really evocative, sometimes quite poetic, sometimes quite sensual, sometimes just disgusting as well. Felt like, you know, that is something that would stay in the body. You know, I'm really interested in stuff that makes us uncomfortable, but it sort of forces you to interrogate why you're feeling uncomfortable, you know, and also judgment, the sense of judgment too that comes with it, you know. So all of these things I think were at play, but it's fun to do it, you know. It's fun to kind of write some of these sensual images and some of the more titillating and some of the more disgusting, just to really sort of bring the world of these shamans to life, but hopefully also in quite a poetic way too. You know, like I said, I kind of want to not just be visceral, but also quite beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
In sort of conjuring, you know, the spiritual practices, the world, the desires, the ambitions of these women, but also like pain as well, you know, physical pain and emotional turmoil. I think particularly for Zulmira, there is a lot of that going on. And Zulmira and Teresa, kind of like almost two sides of the same coin, you know, and what happens is, as you read the novel, there is this sort of blurring and amalgamation that happens, you know, bit by bit by bit, both with the sort of motifs and the physical body as well. And then also, you know, the utopic state, utopia, and the past world kind of bleeding into that. So there's a lot of blurring, you know, bodily blurring and blooming, and reconfigurations and transformations through different time periods. Yeah, I'm intrigued by a transformation. I think that underpins a lot of my work. But I think a lot of that is to do with, you know, having, you know, quite a difficult personal life, having a family where I have a sister with health conditions. I'm a carer. My mother has lost most of her sight. So, you know, I'm her carer. I have a sister with epilepsy. So I spent a lot of my life and time in hospitals dealing with, you know, pain and trauma. So the writing space is really a space that I really cherish. And I kind of use that space to explore all of this stuff. And hopefully in a rich and, you know, transformative way. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that about yourself as well, because it actually absolutely tracks with the kind of healing components of spiritual practice and the shaman, right? The kind of, you know, intersubjective ways in which the healing occurs that is painful, intimate, takes a toll, which I think is the case in which, of course, there are components of the novel that are clearly like, you know, speculative fiction, but there are components of it that are really true to life, whether you are a practitioner of traditions that include shamanistic practices, trance, possession, but also just kind of what might be considered more ordinary everyday life in the context of contemporary Britain, right? So I think that really registers, and I think that component of health healing really shines through as well. I know that we were sort of thinking of keeping the conversation to about 40 minutes, so I might kind of close out with a question, and then perhaps we can end with a final reading.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm interested also in the way in which there is a parallel in between the writing, what you're doing, your artistic practice, and the spiritual practice as arguably, but don't argue with me, hopefully, arguably, modes of utopic theorizing for futures that are predicated on sort of, in a way, like these more just, more fully felt and lived ways of being in the world. And I wondered if you might think through that with us, and perhaps think through your kind of relationship to art and the genre, because, you know, we really first sort of thought about having you come through a Black to the Future event as a mode of kind of utopic theorizing, right? As a way of thinking through what could be, what ought to be, through art.
Right.
Is that something you might be able to expand upon a bit? Just to
Yeah, of course. No, I can talk about that. Firstly, thank you so much. It's funny, having created Black to the Future, it's like a double-edged sword. Everybody now wants to talk to me about Black to the Future, which is the festival that I sort of created. And Black to the Future really is, I guess, exploring the lived experiences of Black artists in a really, hopefully, expansive way. So normally Afrofuturism is looked at through the lens of science and technology. And we have the mother of that, Octavia Butler, who I was so inspired by, and, just like absorbed a lot of her work. So that was really the seed years ago that was planted in me. I thought I would love to do something around creating a space where we get to explore Black artistic talent in a way that feels exciting, dynamic, and really brings those voices that are often on the margins to the center. So that was the impetus for Black to the Future. And we program, around literature, film, music, science and technology. We had the first run of it sort of like last year and the year before, rather ambitiously. Events ran for like over a year, which is a crazy thing to have done. But we really, really wanted to just push back against that whole idea of, oh, Black History Month is just the only month where we have Black events, even though we did launch it on Black History Month. But that was the sort of way we were able to get into venues and have the conversations. And, oh, yeah, we can do it, but would you be willing to do it around Black History Month? So I was like, sure. And then off the back of that, we were able to take it, to different venues and kind of do lots of events over a year, which I was exhausted by, but also it was really amazing, to sort of, help create that artistic community. I mean, I didn't do it myself. I had two producers working with me, and I'm very grateful for their sort of input. But yeah, it was really to sort of, I was very frustrated having been on the scene for several years as a writer. I feel like the Black experimental voice is not celebrated, basically. And I feel like, when I would do events, they would very rarely ask me about craft, which is why it's so amazing to do this event, because you've asked me so much about craft. It's really beautiful. And it's actually can be quite an unusual thing. Very often that people invite you to talk about diversity and solving the problems around that. And, but not often enough about, the practice as an artist and what that looks like. And so, for me, there was a gap. And I basically just wanted to lift up other voices that I feel, other Black voices, diasporically, that I feel are doing really interesting things. And I wanted to wait till I was in a position where I could leverage, what I'd done and be able to use that. Because obviously I couldn't do that in the beginning, but having managed to get some critical acclaim, I was in a position where, okay, I can use that now and have conversations with people and venues. So I spoke to the RSL, Wally Rosenberg, who's the director there, who's incredible. And I kind of pitched Black to the Future to her and said, look, this is my baby, and I've been dreaming about this project.
Okay.
Yeah, baby and Curandera, baby is Black to the Future. And she said, oh, I love it. Let's find a way to support you. And it was through having conversations with her that the British Library came on board, the Standard Hotel came on board, other venues came on board. So yeah, I'm really, really grateful for that. I think art is healing, and I'm eternally grateful to have been a big book reader as a kid, and just I was one of these crazy kids that would take out the maths on the library card, and the librarians knew me. I would come in and they go, "Oh, Irenosen, this is in. You're gonna like this." I was one of those, and I'm so grateful for that, because that gave me a key to kind of unlock my imagination, and how beautiful it is to be able to think imaginatively and what that can do, how you can manifest that in reality. So, for me, Black to the Future was all about that. Myself and my then producer, Sarah Ville, had been dreaming about this project, what it would look like, what events we would put on, how we would program it, who we would ask to be involved in it. And then we were able to make that a reality. And it was just amazing, not just to see it happen, but to see, a community sort of coming into fruition, because you'd have some people come to certain events, and then those same people would come to other events, and then they'd tell their friends. And I was just sitting like watching all of this, just really heartened that, Black artists who are, kind of pushing the boundaries were being celebrated. And for me, there's room for all of us, that's the important thing. There's, coming up, being published, it was really difficult for me to get published. A lot of people don't know that, but my first agent, when we submitted, everybody said no. All the big guys said no. Everybody said no. But they all said really nice things. They were like, oh, yeah, Irenosen's writing is really strong, but it's a little bit too weird for us. And we don't know how we're going to market her. And I was kind of like, I don't know what to do with that, because essentially that's, that's my voice, what do you do? And at the time, this is pre all the diversity conversations, publishing was not where it is now, where it's much more open and inclusive. So it was really interesting. I got picked up by a small independent press, Jacaranda Books. And, Valerie Brands, who's wonderful, also a Black woman, one of the few Black publishers around, said, I love these stories. They're absolutely batshit crazy. But I really want to publish them, but let's publish the novel first so that we get you an audience. And then, we can release the story. So, off the back of that, after some critical acclaim, then Hachette came calling, and that was through Dialogue Books with Charmaine Lovegrove, who was the head of Dialogue, also a Black woman. And she came to an event that I did at a salon with young Black girls. And it was on Speak Like Angela. And I was just chatting to them, in a hair salon, talking about short stories. And she came in and rocked up, and then it became like a two-hander. And within that conversation, she said, oh, who's publishing? She was a fan of my writing and said, well, who's publishing your next two books? And I said, well, we don't know. We're sending them out. And she said, what? She said, I really want first dibs, to take a look. So we sent her like the first 3 chapters of Curandera and Nudibranch, and, she signed me off the back of that. So it was really interesting, having been in the position where I was sort of knocking on the door for years and years, to then be in the position where, sort of got that second deal really quickly. It was just so different, but also lovely, but it's a different kind of pressure. I was so hungry when I was writing Speak Like Angela. I was so, I didn't know how to translate my lived experiences, and writing those stories felt like the perfect space to do that, so kind of circling back to Black to the Future, I wanted to give that to other, Black artists. And it was really wonderful. Like, the audiences were so mixed, this is something we say, but if you share good stories, I feel like, all kinds of audiences are interested. Often it's the gatekeepers who say, oh, there isn't a place for this, or there isn't a place for that. But actually, no, audiences just care about interesting, good stories. And we were really blessed to have people support the project. So in terms of art as practice, if I wasn't a writer, I'd probably be a serial killer. I'm not joking. Genuinely, like, it's helped me so much. But I also just absolutely love books. Like, I'm just such a voracious reader and sort of absorber of art, whether it's women artists, going to exhibitions and what have you. I just love it. I get such feel from it. So I'm really grateful for all of that. And hopefully it's reflected in, I do think that there is some onus to give back, so, and that's also why I do a lot of judging. It's really humbling, and it's so amazing to read the voices that are out there, to read all the new voices out there doing incredible things, so that, that kind of puts you in a position also to help other writers. I remember when I was judging the BBC Short Story Award, he's really successful now. There's a writer called Caleb Azuma Nelson, who's everywhere. We shortlisted one of his short stories when we were judging that. And I remember saying, he almost won. He actually almost won. But then it went to Sarah Hall, who's an amazing, incredible writer. You talk about women writers who do things with the body in a visceral way. Sarah Hall is phenomenal. And rightly so, because of what she's done for the short story form. But yeah, he almost won it, and he's gone on to do incredible things. So I feel like I had a hand in that, because I really advocated for him. And that's the wonderful thing about doing this. You get to advocate for other voices. So I've been, really lucky in that sense to remember that with Black to the Future, that it's not, for me, it's about opening up the space. I'm writing also for, future Irenesens who may not know they can write stories like this. But in the same way that when I picked up Octavia Butler, I had no idea that there were Black sci-fi writers. I was just blown away. Then I read Samuel R. Delany, listen to Sun Ra and all these, that there is this history of, Black experimentation in the artistic space. And that gave me so much courage. And I just want to pass that on with projects like Black to the Future and the body of work that I have, hopefully.
I mean,
sorry, that was such a long response.
No, I
to the
loved
question.
it. I loved it. And it is again a parallel in terms of community making, kinship making. So I think it was really beautiful and poignant. And it is unsurprising but gross about the kind of tokenism that you were speaking about. And actually we chatted about that a bit too, where we were like, yeah, Black History Month, International Women's Day, but like these are conversations that we feel this as a school, like we want to embed into the everyday, and of course we'll take opportunities when there are to have these conversations, but to not just have them be these weird kind of siloed moments and this is when you can do it, but no other time. So we're just super, super grateful for you to be here. Shall we do a reading before we open up the...
Yeah, I'll do a last final reading.
That's fine. Everything. I know I don't need one.
On the night the thunders come, a distant wind reveals its secrets to the pale horn traveling across the rooftops of Gethsemane. Moonshine seeps into the hooves of animals, marrow weeps against plant roots, crown refashions into a woman's face doused in exotic scents in the half-light. Pockets breathe against skin. Sueli traces the circular patterns from the cave walls in her sleep, and the clay heart turns in the soil, cracked from borrowing my hunger as inheritance. Dominguez disappears again, wandering the wilds of the land, an occurrence that never ceases to worry Marguerite, who fiddles restlessly to keep her hands busy, to stave away bad thoughts leaking into the homestead's charged atmosphere, where unruly things grow in the dark. You would understand my fears, she says one day, standing in their bedchamber doorway, shoulders rising defensively, face tightening, mouth quivering, if you were in my position, although you do not strike me as a woman who has ever had a husband. You are too spirited, too willful, but I can see you understand the ways of men, their needs and desires. This illness has ravaged parts of me, areas he used to know. I fear he seeks those comforts elsewhere. I have not had the need for a husband this time, I say, hearing the shudder of the mountains, kin breathing over the bone hidden in my wall, the shape of their petticoats swishing above the garden's vegetation, the hum of bees on the split pink melon acting as a trap, the breathing of foreign footprints in the pantry floor. The ways of men are many and deceptive. Do not get yourself into knots examining them, I tell her. I listen. I braid her hair, pressing my fingers into her skull like a newborn in my hands. I do not comfort nor persuade. I watch her shoulders steady, the smooth skin of her throat, the incline of her neck in my hold. I savor the trust of it. Her sickness is spreading inside her. Her time as mother and wife is waning. The homestead knows it. It is written in the air our bodies consume. When a man cannot name the illness that ails his wife, he becomes restless, frustrated, seeking answers beyond the valley they built with their bare hands. He will return, I add, holding her head gently, blinking against a sudden desire to mount it on a wall made of kin's shadows. Of course he would come back, even if he is part thunder, rumbling in our rooms with new truths in his mouth. He would return to the three of us. I set off at first light with Rowena the following day to mine the sea for its seaweeds, or kelp, as it is also known in these parts, by some of the town's women who harvest it for various uses. The call for me came several days earlier through a woman named Hayasi, who helps run one of the local shebeens. Kelp hunting is an activity the braver women of the town do, away from the eyes of their men, who pretend the weeds simply wash up on the shores overnight. Harvesting kelp for its benefits has been happening in Gethsemane for many moons. It takes me away from the sadness in our homestead, the gnarly guilt about baby, the invasive sky infiltrating of kin. The homestead is a carcass without Domingus's presence. Rowena and I meet the 6 women at Piranu Point, tucked behind Norma Mountain, where a few goshawks gather, streaking above our heads, squawking as we make our way down to the beach, light guiding bodies eager to embrace the day's adventures. The sky is subdued in the absence of thunder. A fangled creature limps on the shoreline, bearing the injuries of weather before leaving my eye line. Murmurs of the sea reach sand, stone, and rocks, its liquid hatchings keen to burrow in the morning. We hunt for green and red kelp. The waters are cold against our dark skin. We swim like rare butterflies given ocean wings, holding our breaths. The seaweed undulates, curling between strokes, the water's entrails in our fingers. Red kelp gleams like blood, plants, iridescent, pliable, a piece of flight caught in the hand. I'll stop there. Thank you.